December 17th, 1760. 10:23 at night. London. Buckingham Palace. The darkness was so deep that even the flames of the candles were trembling. In the innermost chamber of the palace, upon a massive throne decorated with gold and red velvet, sat the new king of the British Empire, King George III. He was only 22 years old, but in his eyes there was no age. Within them burned that hunger for power which never extinguishes. He looked toward his advisors and without any hesitation said that the American colonies are the greatest asset of the British Empire, and that asset would always remain his. That night, no one knew that this very arrogance, this very single thought, would in the coming 30 years give birth to such a fire that would change the map of the entire world. America at that time was a collection of 13 colonies. That land stretching from Boston to Georgia lay crushed beneath the British flag. The people there spoke English, followed English laws, but in their hearts there was a strange restlessness. That restlessness was of freedom. That restlessness was of this question: if we were born on this land, farmed this land, fought for this land, then why does a king sitting far away have the right to rule over us? A king who has never even touched the soil here. 1763, America, after the Treaty of Paris. After winning the long 7-year battle with France, Britain was exhausted and broken too. The war had hollowed out the British treasury. King George III and his ministers found a solution: impose new taxes on the American colonies. After all, it was for their protection that this war had been fought. This argument seemed very logical in London, but in America, this argument became a spark. The people of the colonies said that taxes will be taken from us, but we have no representative in the British Parliament. This is injustice. This is slavery. And from this very single thought was born that slogan that became immortal in history: no taxation without representation. October 1765, Philadelphia, 8 o'clock at night. Benjamin Franklin was in London at that time. He was the informal ambassador of the American colonies, a person who understood both worlds. The eyes hidden behind his spectacles were always seeing something that was not visible to anyone else. When the British Parliament passed the Stamp Act, meaning a tax on every paper printed in America, every newspaper, every legal document, Franklin quietly wrote a letter. In that letter, he had warned that this law would set America on fire. London ignored that letter, and fire broke out. In the lanes of Boston, a secret organization named Sons of Liberty emerged. These people who gathered in the darkness of night were ordinary American citizens, merchants, farmers, lawyers, printing press operators, but in their hearts burned only one fire. They threatened the officials of the Stamp Act, burned their houses, and boycotted British goods. So much pressure was built that in 1766, the British Parliament had to withdraw the Stamp Act. This was America's first victory, a small victory, but a victory. March 5th, 1770, Boston, 9:45 at night. Snow was falling. On King Street stood a detachment of British soldiers. The crowd was growing, an angry crowd, throwing stones, shouting. And then that happened which history never forgot. The British soldiers fired. 5 American citizens were killed. Among them was Crispus Attucks, a black man who perhaps became the first martyr of the American Revolution. The blood that was shed that night in Boston shook all of America. Newspapers called it the Boston Massacre, and that name erected in millions of hearts such a wall of hatred against British rule that was now never going to fall. December 16th, 1773, Boston Harbor, 11 o'clock at night. The sea was black, the wind was cold, and on 3 British ships standing in Boston Harbor there was a strange commotion. Members of the Sons of Liberty, disguising themselves as indigenous Native American tribal people, boarded those ships. They threw 342 crates of tea, worth lakhs of rupees by today's measure, into the sea. This was a protest against the monopoly of the British East India Company that was destroying American merchants. History gave this event the name Boston Tea Party, but this was no party. This was a declaration. This was America's first open challenge to the British Empire. When King George III received this news, his face turned red. He immediately passed the Coercive Acts, which were called Intolerable Acts in America. Boston Harbor was closed, the autonomy of Massachusetts was snatched, British soldiers were given the right to forcibly stay in American homes. The king felt that with this strictness, America would bow down, but the king was wrong. America did not bow and did not break either. It became one. September 1774, Philadelphia, the First Continental Congress. Representatives of the 13 colonies gathered under one roof for the first time. This was a historic moment. Among these people was a calm but resolute landowner from Virginia, George Washington. He did not speak much, but when he spoke, every word fell like a stone. He said that the day is not far when we will have to take up arms. The Congress decided to boycott British goods and sent a final appeal to the king. That appeal reached London and was ignored. April 19, 1775, Lexington, Massachusetts, 5 o'clock at dawn. Mist was spread, dew was on the grass, and on the Lexington Green stood 77 American militia soldiers, farmers, merchants, ordinary people who had guns in their hands and both fear and courage in their hearts. From the front, a large detachment of the British Army was coming, professional soldiers in red uniforms with bayonets gleaming. Someone fired the first shot. To this day, no one knows who, but that shot became the shot heard around the world in history. That shot was the beginning of the American Revolution. That shot was the beginning of the end of an empire.
June 1775, Philadelphia, the Second Continental Congress. George Washington was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. He was a strange kind of commander. He had neither sufficient soldiers, nor sufficient weapons, nor sufficient food. But he had something else, an unshakable resolve. He knew that he could not defeat the British Army in direct battle. Therefore, he adopted a different strategy. Do not confront, exhaust. Fight, retreat, fight again. This was that form of guerrilla warfare which went on to become the foundation of many revolutions of the world. December 26, 1775, New Jersey, 2 o'clock at night. The cold was so terrible that a thick sheet of ice was spread over the Delaware River. George Washington's soldiers were hungry, exhausted, and their shoes were so old that while walking in the snow, blood was coming out of their feet. Many soldiers had decided to flee. The morale was so broken that it seemed this revolution would breathe its last right here. But that night, Washington did something that no one had thought of. He made his exhausted, broken soldiers cross the icy river in the darkness of night, silently, without any sound. And before dawn broke, he launched a sudden attack on the Hessian soldiers at Trenton. The enemy was asleep. The victory was completely America's. This was not just the victory of one battle, this was the return of the soul of a broken army. Washington knew that war is won not so much by weapons as by resolve. But victory on the battlefield was not enough. America needed a weapon that was sharper even than a sword, the weapon of words. And that weapon was being prepared in a small building in Philadelphia by the hands of a young Virginian, Thomas Jefferson. He was writing rapidly. In the light of the candle, his pen was not stopping. He knew that the words he was writing would not just be a document, they would be the foundation of a new world. July 4th, 1776, Philadelphia, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The heat in that small building of the Pennsylvania State House was unbearable. Outside there was a crowd, inside there was tension. And on the table lay that document which Thomas Jefferson had written staying awake night after night. The representatives of the Continental Congress signed it one by one. Benjamin Franklin was sitting there. On his face was a deep smile, that smile which comes when someone knows that history is being made.
The name of that document was Declaration of Independence, and in its first lines was written that all men are created equal and they have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This was not just a declaration of America's freedom, this was a new idea for all of humanity. Such an idea that going forward ignited a revolution in France, inspired the independence movement in India, and gave voice in every corner of the world to those people who had been suppressed for centuries. But declaring freedom is one thing, and achieving it is an entirely different thing. When King George III read the Declaration of Independence, he called it a piece of paper. He ordered his army to crush this rebellion. The British Army was the most powerful army in the world. They had trained soldiers, modern weapons, and a vast navy. What did Washington have? They were farmers, they were merchants, and there was unbreakable faith. September-October 1777, Saratoga, New York. This was that battle which changed the course of the revolution. British General John Burgoyne was coming from the north with a massive army. His plan was to cut New York and divide the American army into two halves. But American soldiers, hiding in the forests, from the hills, from behind the cover of trees, attacked them. This was not the battle that the British knew. This was the soil of America, and every stone, every tree, every river of this soil supported the American soldiers. Burgoyne had to surrender. 6,000 British soldiers were taken prisoner, and that day the world felt for the first time that perhaps this rebellion can actually do something. The victory at Saratoga opened another door, the door of Paris. Benjamin Franklin was in Paris. He was not sitting there merely like an old scientist. He was thinking every move like a chess player. And after the victory at Saratoga, France's King Louis XVI became convinced that America can win. In February 1778, France formed an alliance with America. The French army came, the French navy came, and French money came. This revolution was no longer just America's. It had become an international struggle. 1978 to 1981, the final chapter of the war. Washington's army had recovered from that terrible winter of Valley Forge, where thousands of soldiers had died from hunger and cold. That army was now stronger than before, more disciplined. In the South, the British Army was advancing. In the Carolinas and Virginia, they had achieved many victories. But with every victory, their supply lines were becoming longer, their soldiers were growing more tired, and the resistance of the local population was increasing. British General Cornwallis felt that victory was in his hands. But victory is a deceptive thing. The moment it seems closest, it is actually farthest. October 19, 1781, Yorktown, Virginia. This was the final stage. Washington, joining with French General Rochambeau, conducted such a siege that Cornwallis could not get out. On the land were the American and French armies. On the sea was the French navy. Cornwallis waited for help, but help did not come. He tried to break the siege, but could not break it. And on October 19, 1781, that day came, which was recorded in history forever. 8,000 British soldiers surrendered. Cornwallis himself, using illness as an excuse, did not come to that ceremony. Perhaps he could not bear to witness that humiliation with his own eyes. On his behalf, a lower-ranking officer handed over the sword to Washington, and in that one moment, the greatest military power of the world bowed before a new, unborn nation. September 3, 1783, Paris. The Treaty of Paris was signed. Britain officially accepted the independence of America. Benjamin Franklin was sitting there. In his eyes there were tears, but those tears were not of sorrow. Those were the tears of that long journey that he had witnessed. Those were tears for those thousands of people who had died before seeing this freedom. Those were tears for that idea which one day was a dream and today had become a reality. September 17, 1787, Philadelphia, Constitutional Convention. The war had ended, but to build a new nation, to manage it, to run it, this work was even more difficult than war. In Philadelphia, the representatives of the 13 states gathered again. Washington was presiding over that meeting. After months of debate, after disagreements, after compromises, the Constitution of the United States was prepared.
This was the world's first written constitution, which was based on the principles of democracy, freedom, and justice. And the first line of that constitution was, "We the people." We the people, not any king, not any empire, just the people. April 30th, 1789, New York. George Washington took oath as the first president of the United States of America. He was such a person who had been offered the proposal of becoming a king, and he had refused. Because he knew that if this nation got a king, then everything for which thousands of people had died would become meaningless. That day, when Washington took the oath, an old farmer standing in the crowd said, "This is the day that we used to dream of. This is the day when even the son of an ordinary person can become the greatest leader of his country." The American Revolution was not just a political event. It was the victory of an idea. It was the victory of this thinking that power comes not from the sword, but from the consent of the people. It was the victory of this thinking that any empire, however powerful it may be, if it stands on injustice, then one day it will certainly fall. What King George III had thought that night in Buckingham Palace, that America would always remain his, that thinking had been reduced to dust, and from that dust had arisen a new nation, a new dream, a new world. But history is never this simple. In that constitution, behind those magnificent words, a deep contradiction was hidden. Thomas Jefferson had written that all men are created equal, but Jefferson himself was a slave owner. In that new nation, thousands of black people were still enslaved. Women did not have the right to vote. The lands of the indigenous Native American people were being seized. That dream of freedom was not for everyone, not yet. This incompleteness was such a wound in the heart of America that going forward would give birth to yet another war, the Civil War. But that is another story, the story of another night. The spark that had ignited in the lanes of Boston in 1765, that spark by 1789 had become such a torch in whose light the entire world found its path. France saw, India saw, Latin America saw, Africa saw. Every person who was crushed under the burden of some empire in the light of that torch saw a hope, and that hope burns even today, because freedom never dies, it only waits.